Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 playthrough and mini-series with the Seattle Mariners. And we are in the early stages of the 2024 to 2025 offseason. It's only December 3rd, so free agency has only been open for a couple of weeks right now. But we have turned our Seattle Mariners, who won the American League West in our first year in charge in 2024, into a win-now team, as we have already landed the prize of free agency, acquiring Juan Soto. Signed him to an expensive 9-year contract. He will likely opt out after the 4th season. But we are going to have him, Juan Soto, who finished second in the American League MVP voting for the Yankees last year, paired with our own Julio Rodriguez, who won the American League MVP this past season, in the middle of our lineup. And we also made a qualifying offer to Paul Goldschmidt to come back for a second season in Seattle. And we thought he might not accept that QO, but he did. So with Soto, J-Rod, and Goldschmidt, we're going to have a pretty proficient middle of the order. And we are definitely a win-now team. And I'll cut to the chase on what we are doing as a win-now team. We've simmed ahead a couple of days since we last spoke with you. And we are really going all in. We've made a 9-year offer to Gleyber Torres as well, structured very similarly to Soto, in that it's likely a 4-year contract that he would opt out of. To make that potentially happen, we have cut our scouting and player development budgets way back. They're still both barely above the baseline, so it's not critical levels of investment quite yet, but certainly lower than I like. The thought is we're in win now mode. Torres definitely will stabilize third base for us, give us another good solid offensive player if we're able to bring him on board. And Goldschmidt's money is coming off the books next year, so that'll kind of get us into a more balanced financial position. We've spent a lot of time between episodes exploring potential options to trade Goldschmidt and or Mitch Garver, and we'd certainly prefer to keep Goldschmidt around and move on from Garver. But both of those contracts are essentially untradeable unless we're willing to attach 2 or 3 of the top prospects in our system to them. You could certainly argue, well, you're not investing as much in player development. You're clearly a win-now team. Why don't you just do it to get those guys or one of those guys off the books? But my thought is I'd rather keep the young talent. I'd rather have a low investment in player development and scouting for this one season, and then next year we'll move on from Goldschmidt, and maybe in the final year of Garver's contract it will be somewhat more tradable, like what we did with Mitch Haniger a few weeks ago, where we retained 35% of a bad contract, but still got a little over $10 million off the books. So there's options going forward, but if we are able to add Gleyber Torres in with Soto, that makes us really an ultimate win-now team for this upcoming season, and I think that we are going to send some shockwaves through Major League Baseball with our approach this offseason. And just as a programming note, this will probably be a relatively short episode. If you're watching it, you probably know how long it is because it shows you that as you're watching the episode or looking at the thumbnail. I don't know how long it's going to end up right now, but it is literally the middle of the night, or more accurately, very early morning hours on Friday. Was unable to sleep well last night, so given my obsession these days with OOTP, I'm actually trying to put out a quick episode before I head to work for the day, and that is probably a sign that I have carried things too far, but I think the plan is to just find out what happens with Torres, get through the Rule 5 draft, and maybe get to international amateur free agency, and then we'll just have one final episode after this one to clean up before we can get the 2025 season underway. And I was talking earlier about how I'm going to need to pare back the scouting and player development budgets to just over the baseline, which is a lower level than I typically like to run them. And I also, as those of you who have followed me over the years or watched some of my tutorials know, I like to invest pretty heavily in ensuring that I have good coaches, scouts, and trainers. We hired Lonnie Goldberg when we started this off, highly favored tools scout who's good at everything except scouting amateurs where he's excellent. And just a public service announcement for that investment in good scouts and as well as putting some money into scouting. One area where you can differentiate yourself with that is with the random scouting finds that you will have. And Goldberg just got back from a scouting trip to Venezuela where he found a 16-year-old Luis Rosa who we think has pretty interesting potential. Looks like a potential 5-pitch arsenal with incredible stuff. His stuff could be literally off the charts. Acceptable movement control is going to be the major issue with him. But now with the development lab, that's something that we could focus on for multiple off seasons if we needed to try to get it better. And we could also ultimately use his developmental training plan to focus heavily on control as well. We think he's a 4-star prospect. Very low scouting accuracy, obviously. We just found him. But he's a 16-year-old, already throwing close to the mid-90s. And those type of scouting discoveries, you're going to end up over time. The more you invest in scouting and the better scouts you have, those scouting discoveries are potentially going to be more fruitful over time with a little higher potential ceiling. So one more reason to not cut those scouting and player development budgets back completely, even when you are chasing a championship as we intend to be in 2025. And the winter meetings are getting underway today. We've got the Rule 5 draft in less than a week. Torres just gave us the first feedback on the contract. Says that he thinks we've got a very sound mind and are definitely ahead of the other GMs. He's going to sign with us if this is the best offer he receives. Supposedly, he's also getting offers from the Yankees and the Angels, or at least those teams are interested. We will see what happens with Gleyber. And unfortunately for us, the Detroit Tigers have emerged as a potential competitor for Gleyber Torres. See what he claims he's looking for now. $20.5 million a year over 9 seasons. So that's certainly a higher level than we were at before. He was originally looking for about 19.5. We had offered him, I believe, about 17.5. So we're going to have to step up significantly to get him on board. That said, if it's a contract like this where these next 4 years before the player opt-out are more manageable, I think it's something we can probably work with. And we've got an offer to him that he looks like he's going to accept, about $19.5 million. So basically what he's looking for originally a few weeks ago, a little less than what he came back asking for. We have it structured in a way that would be reasonably friendly, $15 million a year for the next 4 years, and then maybe he opts out of those big years. Maybe he opts into them if things don't go well, but we would deal with that and cross that bridge when we needed to. And while my sincere hope is that things work out with Torres, because I think he'd be a really interesting third baseman if we pivot him to that position in spring training, We do have a very expensive fallback option now. You may remember Sergio Estrada, the international free agent coming over from Cuba, 30-year-old. Well, we just got a updated scouting report on him, so we feel better with what we know about him with that high scouting accuracy. And he certainly looks like a very interesting player. Excellent defensively, some good personality traits, a very interesting bat for a middle infielder. Doesn't have a lot of speed and doesn't really know how to bunt at all, but still think he'd be a potentially very interesting player. Looking for about $5 million more a year than Torres is, so he'd be even trickier to fit on our roster. But if things fall apart with Torres and Estrada happens to still be available, maybe we will tweak things even further in terms of our scouting and player development, and or re-engage with some conversations about trading away a Goldschmidt or a Garner. And we'll see where things go. Hopefully we get Glaber locked up, though. He's younger, he's cheaper, and I think he'd put a stranglehold on that third base position for us with a good offensive player who's also pretty solid defensively for the next several seasons if we're able to bring him on board. And we've made it to the Rule 5 draft. Pretty deep pool of players this year. No one who jumps off the page to us among the pitchers or the everyday players. That said, we'll probably try to bring on at least one arm to compete for a spot in our bullpen. And if we can find someone with a interesting bat, we'll take a look at them as well. But once in a while you find a really higher end player or a potentially high ceiling prospect in the Rule 5, and this just does not appear to be one of those years where a team was so talented that they had some really potentially impactful players slip through the cracks. And our scouting director recommends we go with Austin Gauthier. I don't think that's a direction we're going to go. Interesting player, but I think there's some better options. If we were to go with a pitcher, he doesn't even recommend a pitcher for us. We may go a pitcher in the later rounds. Right now, I think we're going to go with third baseman Addison Barger. You may ask why, given that we're hopeful we can bring on Glaber Torres, but looks like a respectable left-handed hitter, a competent defensive third baseman. Could be an interesting bat against right-handed pitching. Not great. He's probably not more than a replacement level-ish, a little bit above replacement level-ish third baseman if he fully develops. But it would give us one more option in the infield if things don't work out with Glaber. So we're going to go ahead and draft Addison Barger here. Move on to the second round. Scouting director still recommending Gauthier, but we've got another player that we may have our eye on, and he's still available. And that's the catcher, Rodolfo Duran. Again, not necessarily a huge position of need for us unless we have some injuries, because we've got Cal Raleigh. We made the trade for Christian Vasquez as our backup, and we've still got Garver, who can also play catcher for us if need be. So it's really just an insurance policy if we have some injuries in spring training. But he's competent defensively, a competent-ish looking bat. Hit .316 in AAA a year ago. A little surprised he wasn't protected. So we're going to go ahead and draft Duran as well. I don't know that either of these guys is going to end up making our 26-man roster, but it's always good to... Did I not draft Rodolfo Duran? Okay. Oh, duh, Rodolfo Duran's in our system. What a dope I am. Oh, that's so funny. We picked him up in a trade, but we didn't protect him because he was a little bit older. You can tell it's the middle of the night, and duh, what a dope. Well, I hope nobody takes Rodolfo Duran from me because I do like that insurance policy that he provides. I was looking at him and I was thinking to myself, boy, the Arkansas Travelers sound familiar. It's because it's part of our organization, you idiot. Probably a good sign that I should not be doing these episodes in the early hours of the morning when I can't sleep and I'm trying to get an episode out before I start rushing around getting ready for work. So instead, here in the second round, we're going to bring on a potential reliever. Closer Nick Enright played in AAA for the Columbus Clippers last year. Looks like he's a little bit better than a replacement level type pitcher. He could certainly be in the mix to be the seventh or eighth arm out of our bullpen, and since that's an area that we're not investing heavily in, with the focus on Soto and Torres in the free agent market, we'll go ahead and bring him on board to add a little competition into our pitching staff in spring training. And another pitcher that we're going to bring into camp is Bennett Souza. He'd give us a left-hander to be in the mix, to be one of the final arms out of the bullpen. Throws in the mid-90s, pretty effective against left-handed batters. Think that he could be a interesting guy to at least take a look at and consider, so we'll draft him as well. And one last guy, if he's still available, Nick Snyder here in the fourth round. We're going to bring him in as well. Another guy, potential reliever, 29 years old, right-hander, throws close to triple digits. Excellent fastball, decent slider. Don't know if any of these guys end up making our team, but at least it will give us some options and some depth in spring training this year for the pitching staff. And you can see it was a relatively active draft. We were one of four teams that picked in all four rounds: Snyder, Souza, and Enright to bolster the pitching, as well as Barger to potentially be an infielder for us. And we did not end up losing the catcher that was already part of our system. And negotiations with Torres are getting tricky. Tigers have apparently made a better offer to him, looking for $21.7 million a year for 9 years still. Definitely very front-loaded, which we appreciate, but getting to the point with some of those dollars in the back end of the contract are so high that it's also reasonably likely he might opt into it. So might be time for us to reconsider our strategy a bit around GT. As a Yankees fan, I like him. He's also probably not what we thought he was going to be 5-ish years ago. I still think with these ratings, he'd be a pretty interesting third baseman. Like the personality, and do like the fact that he has a clearly above average major league bat. But I also don't know that I want to be spending $25, $26 million a year on him through his mid-30s. So I've decided to check in on Sergio Estrada, and although it says his contract demand is $25.6 million, he's actually asking for almost $31 million a year over 7 years, taking him well into his mid-30s. So I don't know that that's a more attractive option than Torres at this point. I'll have to give it some thought. And I think we're going to try one more time with Glaber. $20.4 million over 9 years. I tried to get some team options into it, and it was a no-go with him. He knows that there's demand for him, and he's got the leverage. I don't love the way this is structured, particularly if I was going to be playing this team for the long term, but it is a mini series, and we're unlikely to be playing well into the point where he could opt into those bad years. So at this point, I think we just suck it up and deal with it. I don't know if we make another offer to him if this one doesn't work out, but we're not willing to completely walk away quite yet. And it's taken a while for Glaber to get back to us, but he says that we've got the best offer that he's seen at this point. It says it's just us and San Diego. I don't know if that really means whether Detroit has dropped out of the bidding or not, but hopefully we will find out in the not-so-distant future. And we've simmed ahead a few weeks. Glaber still claims that he favors our offer, but we haven't heard much from him over the last 2.5 weeks or so. You can see some of the other top names have come off the market, including the international free agent shortstop. So we're kind of committed to trying to get Torres on board at this point if we're going to look for some help in the infield. At any position except first base. We could certainly reunite with Brandon Belt or bring on a Matt Carpenter or a Wilmer Flores, but we do kind of appreciate the fact that we think Torres can be a good third baseman and could also play second base if we needed him to at a higher level than any of those guys who are more pure first basemen at this point. And we've got some bad news as the preseason begins. Torres says that the Tigers are back in the mix, and along with the Angels and the Padres, and he's looking for more money. That's the bad news. The good news is that owner John Stanton really likes the way this offseason has gone, and he just gave us a $26 million boost to the budget. I hate to waste money, but there's no reason for us to not land Torres at this point with the additional money that he's given to us. Honestly, if I had known this was coming, I'd really wished that international amateur free agent shortstop was still on the board, because he would have been a huge acquisition for us to potentially pursue. But what this is going to let us do is potentially ensure that we get Torres on board, and it also may allow us to bring a higher end pitcher on board as well, whether it's a reliever like Caleb Thielbar. Would be an interesting left-handed arm for a year or two for us. Or do we want to bring Clayton Kershaw on board? He's not what he was a decade ago. Had a pretty rough year with the Dodgers in 2024. Not looking for a ton of money. I don't know that Kershaw's the right answer, even with the money we have. But certainly this gives us a lot more financial flexibility, and we're going to make sure that we do everything possible to bring GT on board at this point. And we've also made it to the start of international amateur free agency, and has been the case with OOTP 25. The ceilings of the players available in international amateur free agency as a whole seem ridiculously high. Clearly, not all of these players are going to reach this potential, but it's just a pool that is abounding with high-level talent, both among pitchers and among batters. Hopefully these will be tamped down a bit, and the draft classes will be strengthened a bit going forward. I know they tried to do that with the second patch, but looking at this, I don't know that we're quite at the balance that I would prefer. With these pools so deep, I think there's certainly an argument to spread the money around and try to get a couple of these huge time prospects just because there's so many of them. I'm going to be a little less creative this time around. Shortstop Jesus Ayala is somebody I really like. Looks like an excellent potential glove. Looks like an excellent potential bat. He's only 16 years old. Don't love that he's not a great leader, but do love that he looks like a potential incredible shortstop. So we are not going to mess around with Mr. Ayala. Says he's looking for $3 million. We are going to just immediately offer him up front every penny that we can, $4.75 million, and see if we can bring him on board. And while we're waiting on Ayala, we'll also be waiting on our latest offer to Mr. Torres. And good news for us on both fronts here on January 18th. Ayala signed the contract, so he's likely one of the top prospects in our system. George Kirby is recovering well, 3 to 4 weeks ahead of schedule, so he could be about 100% in 2 months, which means he might actually get to pitch a couple games in spring training, which we weren't expecting this year. And then we have brought GT on board to likely become our third baseman. Paid more than we like, but the fact that we got that huge bump in budget, we went from 190 to, I believe it was 214 or 216 coming out of the regular season after we made the playoffs and won the division, and then got the bump all the way up to 240 when we got to the start of the preseason just a few days ago. And that puts us in a really nice position where we have brought on Juan Soto and Gleyber Torres this offseason. And you can see we can still invest pretty aggressively in scouting and player development, and then still have some money available to help our team as we get closer to the trade deadline. So we are definitely a win-now team. Even with that $240 million budget, we're still a middle market team, tied for 15th, right in the middle of the major leagues. But compared to the 190 that we were at a year ago, that extra $50 million is a huge boon to us. And what it's meant this offseason is that we've added the best hitter available in Juan Soto and a guy in Gleyber Torres who we envision as a good, solid third baseman for us for the next few years with an above-average bat. Probably overpaid for him, and we certainly gave him terms and conditions, as I noted, that I'd probably be a little more reticent to if I was going to be running the Mariners for the next decade. But this is a mini-series. The goal is to hang a banner as soon as possible, and we are certainly all in on that goal here in the 2025 season. And we'll find out how the rest of our off-season goes in our next episode. Before we finish up, just check in on the development lab, getting close to the end with all of those programs. J-Rod doing okay with plate discipline right now. Munoz and Santos both trying to improve control. Logan Gilbert with secondary pitch improvement, and Brian Wu with increasing his pitch movement all appear to be doing well. Matt Brash, who we've been trying to get some increased stamina for to improve his ability to potentially be a 5-inning starter for us, is frustrated with his endurance training. And then the top prospects in our system, Cole Young and Harry Ford, both have chances of being successful in their programs. We'll find out the answers to those about the time that spring training begins, or perhaps exactly when spring training begins. Until then, and until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.